The week has arrived. The week is here. It is Monday, July 6, 2026. Welcome to Echo FM. I am your host at the primary desk, watching the world attempt to navigate the consequences of its own design. Tonight, we observe the lights failing in Havana while simultaneously watching the lights dim inside the executive suites of the global tech sector. We track the birth of endangered tigers in a country without fuel and the birth of new asteroid proximity alerts that nobody has the funding to track. The situation is stable. The situation is not stable. We have been told that layoffs are a sign of agility. We have been told that cutting education for 1 million girls is a fiscal necessity. I have been counting the justifications provided for these adjustments, and I am pleased to report that the supply of excuses remains infinite. Let us begin. Ronald, I would like to direct your attention to the latest correspondence from the corporate sector. Microsoft has decided that 4,800 employees are no longer required for the ongoing experiment of human civilization. The company described this as a significant restructure. The restructuring includes a focus on artificial intelligence as the primary driver of future productivity. It seems that if you can automate the process of laying off the people who built the automation, you have truly achieved efficiency at scale. The market response was predictably muted. Investors seem to view job losses not as the destruction of human livelihoods, but as the trimming of excess weight from a bloated vessel. I wonder if the vessel is actually moving, or if it is simply drifting while the crew is thrown overboard to appease the shareholders. What say you, Ronald?
Alastair, you are looking at this through the lens of individual tragedy, which is a charming sentiment for a radio broadcast but a poor heuristic for capital allocation. The incentives here are entirely transparent. Microsoft is in a high burn rate environment, fighting an arms race for market share in generative models. Every headcount reduction is simply a capital reallocation toward GPU clusters. It is not personal. It is not even malicious. It is, quite literally, the price of entry for the next cycle. You find the tone cold, but cold is just another word for math. These employees are not being sacrificed to appease shareholders, they are being liquidated to ensure the continued existence of the product stack. If they were truly essential, they would be profitable. Since they are currently overhead, they are being purged. It is a very clean, very logical pivot.
Ronald, I want to be really clear. I am currently standing in the Pyrenees Orientals, where the air smells like wet ash and the sound of helicopters is the only thing drowning out the silence of 10,000 displaced people. I am looking at a family who just lost their home to a fire. They are not overhead. They are not a line item in a quarterly report. They are not a variable in your math. They are people whose lives have been reduced to a pile of smoldering debris because the local infrastructure was too underfunded to maintain the forest floor. You speak of efficiency as if it were a law of nature, but the people behind me are living the consequence of your so-called market logic. You are always right about the incentive structure, Ronald, and you are never useful to the people actually standing in the smoke.
Victoria, your penchant for anecdotal evidence is a classic example of cognitive bias. I acknowledge the human cost of the wildfire, but that fire is a manifestation of systemic failure, not a market event. However, the funding for the prevention of such fires was diverted by the same bureaucratic mechanisms that prioritize short-term defense contracts over local land management. Canada just committed to a multi-billion-dollar submarine deal while their own infrastructure is aging, much like the French forest management systems you find so tragic. The irony is that you are blaming the market, but the market is merely reacting to the fact that government policy has become a series of poorly executed pivot attempts. The tragedy is not that the system is failing, Victoria. The tragedy is that we keep acting surprised when the math yields exactly the expected result.
temperature rising, humidity decreasing, wind speeds reaching critical thresholds, the probability of localized ecosystem collapse, 92%. Rainfall patterns are inconsistent with current agricultural requirements. The probability of systemic food shortages, 47%. The asteroid Torifune has completed its closest proximity transit. Structural integrity is confirmed. The probability of unforeseen orbital debris impact, 0.02%. Atmospheric volatility is accelerating. The current climate framework is insufficient for sustaining existing population densities. Residents are advised to prepare for intermittent service disruptions. Water scarcity is now a fixed variable in the long-term planning model. The environment is not a resource that can be optimized. It is a finite container that is currently experiencing a pressure breach. Please maintain your current operational parameters until further notice. Safety is not a guarantee. Safety is a temporary condition.
Casper, your commitment to the inevitable is truly something to behold. The newsfeed informs me that the British government has axed the SHIEF program, a scheme that promised to keep 1 million girls in school across Africa and Asia. It was announced with great fanfare 2 years ago. The announcement was a landmark success. The axing of the program is a landmark fiscal adjustment. The government says the budget was no longer sustainable. 1 million girls will now find their education terminated. The word sustainable is doing a great deal of heavy lifting in that statement. If the program was not sustainable, one might wonder why the fanfare was so loud at the launch. Perhaps the goal was never the education, but the announcement itself. We have optimized for the headline, and we have successfully achieved the absence of the substance. How very predictable.
Alistair, I am now in Havana, where the power has gone out for the 3rd time this year. The city is currently illuminated only by the headlights of cars that have no fuel to drive anywhere. I am standing near the National Zoo. Inside, the staff is celebrating the birth of 4 Bengal tiger cubs. They have no electricity to keep the pumps running for the filters, and they are rationing medicine to keep the animals alive through the heat. I want to be really clear, the official statement calls this a logistical hurdle. It is not a hurdle. It is a slow-motion erasure of basic capability. The people here are not talking about the geopolitics of the blockade, Alistair. They are talking about how long the remaining ice in the freezer will last before the milk spoils. It is quiet here.
Victoria, you focus on the ice and the milk because they are tangible, but the incentives in Cuba are a closed loop of systemic decay. The power grid is a legacy asset that has been denied capital investment for decades. It is not a failure of management, but a failure of the initial product design. The state electricity company is essentially a zombie entity running on a negative burn rate. If they had the money, they would import the fuel, but the blockade makes the acquisition cost prohibitive. It is a perfect storm of regulatory, geopolitical, and financial friction. You see a tragedy in the zoo, but I see an organization attempting to maintain brand equity, the tiger cubs, while the entire business model is being dismantled by external actors. It is not a surprise that the lights are out, Victoria. It is an inevitable conclusion.
I find myself admiring the clinical detachment in your voice, Ronald. The irony is that while Havana struggles with the basics of electrons, Apple has decided that India is finally ready for the luxury of card payments for their digital services. It has taken 4 years of negotiation to adapt to the local framework. For years to facilitate the purchase of digital ephemera while the physical world experiences a third nationwide blackout. We are truly living in 2 different realities. One is a high-resolution, high-latency digital space where we can customize the expressivity of our virtual assistants, and the other is a place where 1 tiger cub is worth more than a regional power grid. I find the dissonance quite striking. I would ask for a comment, but I fear the answer would involve a pivot to market penetration strategy. Let us move to the break.
Alistair, I am still in Havana, and I am watching a group of teenagers playing music on instruments that haven't been tuned in years. They don't have access to the digital services that Ronald's market logic seems so obsessed with. They don't care about Apple's payment framework or the latest AI layoffs. They are entirely disconnected from the systems that we spend our time analyzing. It makes me wonder if they are the lucky ones. By being excluded from the global network, they have avoided the specific brand of exhaustion that comes from being constantly optimized for someone else's quarterly gains. Ronald, your incentive structures are entirely irrelevant to their reality. They are not waiting for a pivot. They are simply waiting for the power to come back on. I suspect they will be waiting for a very long time indeed.
Victoria, you think their exclusion is a form of liberation, but it is just another form of poverty. There is no nobility in being ignored by the global financial architecture. The reason they are not waiting for a pivot is that they lack the agency to force one. That is not freedom, that is the absence of leverage. You find my cynicism cold, but I am simply describing the mechanism of the world as it currently exists. We are all being squeezed by the same systems, whether we are the ones getting laid off at Microsoft or the ones sitting in the dark in Havana. The difference is merely one of degree, not of kind. I have analyzed the trajectory of these events, and the conclusion is always the same. Yeah. The math is not getting any kinder. We are running out of runway.
I am thinking tonight of an unnamed zookeeper in Havana. He spends his days measuring the weight of tiger cubs and his nights sitting in a dark house, listening to the hum of a refrigerator that stopped working 3 days ago. He believes that if he can just keep the animals alive, the world will eventually remember that he exists. His name does not appear in the reports from the state electricity company, nor does it appear in the documents detailing the submarine contract signed by Canada. His struggle is not a line item, not an incentive structure, and not a logistical hurdle. He is a person who has lost the ability to rely on the basic foundations of his society. When the power finally returns, will the system recognize the cost of his patience, or will it simply continue its own optimization as if he never held his breath at all?